Now, before we begin today, I'd like to point out that after our last recording session, Matt, the audio expert guy, pointed out to me that apparently I'm not sounding like a professional speaker. To which I responded by saying, Matt, hey Matt, I'm just some guy that was in the Army a way back, and then when I got out of the Army, I led a very boring, non-professional speaker life. So, a non-professional speaker is, in fact, what I am. Now, I am very certain that you have already noticed I'm not a professional speaker. And that's the case because I'm just some guy that was in the Army and now I'm not. And may I say, thank you very much for your support. Our prologue starts at what the best recollection of everyone seems to be 27 days after D-Day. Now, it's true we could have started before D-Day. Unlike the living, we were there before D-Day. But honestly, no one, absolutely no one, not even anyone, wants to recall and recount their own murder. We start somewhere southeast of the old Hardmore mines, probably about half an hour before midnight, according to Lord Robert's personal testimony. It was a dark and stormy night. These were the exact words running through Robert's mind. Doesn't that sound funny? He's Lord Robert to us, but in those days he was just plain Robert. And it is weird sounding. But upon realizing that was the thought in his mind, he wondered how is it appropriate for a cliché to invade such a pressure-packed moment. What does that say about his mind? Of all things, why a cliché? The night was truly dark, given that it was nearing midnight, and given that there was 27 fiery days worth of smoke in the air. The night was certainly stormy in a the world is on fire kind of way. That a cliché was what was on his mind was bugging him. Something else was bugging him. He and the group of people following him were being shot at, but the shooting wasn't bugging him. It was the lack of bugging that bugged him. Another thought in his head was a bit more simple. Why do thoughts run through one's mind? Why can't they walk or even ease their way through the mind? Was this the right time to be thinking on these things? Honestly, when one is running through the darkness while being shot at, is there such a thing as the proper thing to think about? Well, he didn't know. He didn't seem to have a, hey, I'm being shot at, handbook. If it was wrong to think on these things, then he'd just be wrong. He had guessed that there were 3 someones shooting at his group. He didn't know it at the time, but he was right. This group was the last roundup of the evening, and things had taken a turn for the worse. If he could get them to his camp, there were provisions and a means of defense, but that was about a mile away. One of the men who had been with him the longest, since D-Day as a matter of fact, was Edgar. And that sounds funny. We think of him as the High General. Just to call him Edgar just doesn't seem right. In 27 days, he had already become virtually allied to Robert, and as such had accompanied him on every roundup despite the dangers. Edgar reached out to Robert and gently grabbed his arm. This stopped the running. They can't keep up, he said. Well, Robert desperately wanted to say the right thing, but he didn't have all the answers. The bullets haven't stopped, and that was a good point. Edgar agreed. If they collapse from too much running, they'll certainly be targeted. Now, Robert had a way of saying things in which the message was opposite of the words. I hate it when you're right. Edgar smiled. The group was grasping for breath. Robert and Edgar were both large men who were in excellent physical condition, in a manner of speaking. They could keep running, but the others could not. Robert was desperately searching for an answer that would work. Great. That was, of course, sarcasm. The world's on fire, and I'm all out of handbooks. And that honestly did not help, but it was truth, both literally and symbolically. Edgar greatly appreciated honesty and seemed to enjoy attempted humor. I'd write you one, but I seem to be all out of pencils. Out of air, out of handbooks, out of pencils. We picked a fine time to run out of things. Robert thought his retort was a good stall to give himself a bit more time to think. At that moment, with bullets flying, they heard a woman scream. Now Robert is 6 feet 6 inches tall, but his heart is even bigger. Edgar knew the expression on Robert's face and pointed out a cold, hard truth. It could be a trap. You don't know if she's like us. Now what Edgar did not know was this. Robert was thinking 2 thoughts. Help the woman, which is what Edgar had correctly guessed. And, hey, wow, this will get everyone to camp. Which is the thought Edgar had not guessed. Robert put his right hand on Edgar's left shoulder and spoke very seriously as they, along with everyone else, were still gathering breath. Get everyone to camp. I'll draw the bullets away from all of you. Well, Edgar didn't know what to think or say, so he spoke his heart. If we lose you, we'll all die. The intention there was to point out that everyone who had come to be rounded up into Robert's group depended on Robert for everything. He had been the only one who had been able to answer the important questions. Robert spoke in a soothing manner, with a smile on his gray face. We can discuss that when I get back to camp, friend. He meant the part about friend, and Edgar knew it. He lost his smile and continued. Remember, Oaf still has not come round. He'll need special help. Edgar, I'm begging you, please don't lose any of these people. This was the first time since D-Day that Robert put the welfare of his people into the hands of someone else, and that he did very greatly bolstered Edgar's confidence. It permanently changed Edgar. Seeing that Robert truly trusted him, he was now no longer some guy who appreciated the fact that Robert saved his life and believed he owed Robert a debt, but he would, for the rest of his days, be a man vehemently loyal and would never speak or act against him. It was the part about begging that forced Edgar to leave Robert behind, though he earnestly did not want to. Before he left, Edgar threw out another truth. In the month I've known you, you've been the best friend I've ever had. He said this believing he would never see Robert again. With that, he took the others with him, and slowly ran toward Robert's camp, while Robert ran toward the woman's voice. When Robert got to where she was, he immediately saw that she was in fact like him and the others, meaning her skin was grayish in color and leathery looking. She was literally stuck between a literal rock and a literal hard spot. What is it with cliches? Do they just come running when life takes a sudden turn? And there was another one. And apparently they are a lot like thoughts, since they apparently run through one's mind. What is it with his mind? In this case, the literal rock was a rock formation about 7 feet tall, and it formed a kind of L shape. It was a rare place in ANTERRA's massive, flat southern plains, which wasn't actually flat. It meant that they were near the hardbore mines. She was pressed up against the rock at the point where the 2 segments of the L shape met. The hard spot was a large beast which had her cornered. It was about 5.5 feet long, probably nearly 300 pounds. It had very large teeth and 4 paw-claw combinations. Normally, ANTERRAN lions were not aggressive towards people, but this one had been severely injured in the process of having its own world blown to smithereens, and as a result of its injury, was unable to process its own thoughts, or whatever it is that creatures with instinct actually have. If she had her proper mind, she would not have been in this position. But the fact is, the human mind is not designed for coming back. Upon being revived, there's a period of horrendous, mind-numbing confusion. It was clear that she was lost in that state. People were shooting at them. The woman was about to be lying dinner. Robert had a huge heart. The world was on fire, and there was no handbook to be found. Robert believed that this was officially a bad day. He noticed that she had a weapon, namely a large piece of rebar. That means she had to have ran all the way from the eye-connect, or more correctly, the eye-connect ruins. That was very impressive. Either she was in excellent physical condition, or she had tremendous willpower, or probably even both. Whichever the case, she had to be far from ordinary. His heart was already bleeding for her, but when she cried out, it completely broke, and something snapped inside Robert. When she realized he was there, she begged him with a face full of tears, "Please help me." He didn't realize that he was just staring at her. He didn't realize that she had taken control of his mind. He was angry and befuddled by the fact that she could so easily render him dysfunctional by means of her being, here he had trouble finding the words, impressive and far from ordinary. And now, he could not even think straight. After quickly and carefully placing himself close to her, he grabbed her rebar, and in one incredible move, in an instant, repositioned his body while at the same time raising his hand which held the weapon. When he brought the weapon to bear upon the beast's head, it was truly an act of mercy for the horribly injured beast. If she had her mind, the woman would have realized Robert had just displayed an unworldly strength. While Robert didn't know it at the time, there was a legitimate explanation for it. The woman immediately made her thoughts clear as she jumped to him and put her arms around him. Robert didn't know a person could shake to such an extent. It was clear the mind-numbing confusion does not interfere with fear. The shooters were getting closer, and in fact could be there any moment. But there was no way this woman could run. She had to calm down, and had to be able to focus. When he processed that thought, his mind wondered if the grammar in that had to be able was officially acceptable. But honestly, how was he going to cause focus to happen for her? It bugged him that his mind thought, gonna? It bugged him that his mind had so many questions and very few answers. And since his mind was in question mode, how many bullets could they possibly have? And don't they realize in a destroyed world, bullets will soon be really hard to come by? It is possible, however, that when one is attempting to shoot people for no reason whatsoever, that one may not be thinking well. All of this miscellaneous rambling in the back of Robert's mind did not in any way keep him from focusing on the task at hand. They were simply a secondary processing that his mind automatically performed without his conscious permission. "My name is Robert, and as you can see, I am just like you. What's your name?" He said it as gently as he could. She was shaking from the fear, almost violently, Robert noted. She could barely move her mouth to say the words, which came out slowly. "They were shooting at me." Her blank stare was not a good sign, but Robert had learned over the past month that type of statement, though it didn't answer the question, was actually a good thing. The tremendous lack of desiring to die means the mind still badly wants to live. That means the confusion had not yet won the battle and enslaved her with insanity or some other mental problem. And the bullets had not yet stopped, but Robert was cool under fire, which, when he reminded himself to remain in such a state, he came to hate the way he thought it. And that one was probably the worst cliché yet this evening. Robert was trying desperately to arrive upon the correct words and or actions, but fate had decided not to be funny on this day. It was at this moment that the three shooters arrived and pointed the business end of their rifles at Robert, who slowly stepped out of the frightened woman's embrace and turned to face the men. They were standing in a straight line, side by side, each wearing a slight grin. The one in the middle did the talking. "Well, looky here. We got us a couple of seconds." It did not come out in a way that suggested any concept of or form of education, and it also suggested a reason behind the apparent lack of thinking concerning the frightfully intense bullet sharing in a world that was destroyed. Robert believed he understood that slaughtering of the language. Not having the handbook, he wasn't sure what to say, so he decided to wing it, and he very much hated that one. And that one, he came to believe, was surely absolute proof that his mind was not in control of his mind, since his mind is tired of cliches. He spoke very professionally and very politely. "Hello, my name is Robert." There was a quick moment of silence, which Robert did not understand. It appeared as though it took a moment for the man to figure out what to do. Upon figuring out how to respond, the man attempted humor. "My name is Ennis, and you got yourself a sicko girly. I wondered what sickos did in the dark." Well, after getting that slaughtering spewed out, he added a chuckle, as did his two friends. "Really? That was funny? What can you say to that besides wow?" Again, Robert's words came out professionally. "My friend and I are not in any way sick, and we will gladly go our way." Ennis was quick this time, and Robert forced himself not to think the words quick on the draw. "You got gray skin. You're a sicko. No, no, no. We can't let you and your girlie go. We can't let you go off and make more sickos. We're going to cure your disease." There was more laughter from the trio, while Robert was thinking that it was quite impressive that a man that had murder on his mind, and who so flawlessly murders the language, could be so poetic. And then he wondered if poetic was a term that should be applied to Ennis. His background mind began to ponder whether or not, by applying poetic to Ennis, he had just committed a grammatical atrocity. Now, how poetic would that be? An atrocity in an already atrocious moment. Or perhaps he misunderstood poetic. He had come to learn a long time ago that misunderstanding happens in the presence of a total lack of handbooks. Suffice it to say, Robert was already tired of this. As the three men laughed rather heartily, Robert declared to himself that said laughter will be their last mistake, and then immediately openly showed how he intended to convert that declaration into physical reality. The attackers had not realized that Robert was holding something that could be used as a weapon, though they should have, because it was a bit bulky. It was just as he was about to make a move that Robert realized the rebar was not a small piece, but in fact was large. This meant that she had ran that tremendous distance while carrying something large and heavy. Who was this woman? In an instant, he made another fantastic move and swung the rebar in a way that caused it to come into contact with the head of the attacker on Robert's left, which caused the head to come into contact with the head of the attacker in the middle, which caused the head to come into contact with the head of the attacker on Robert's right. All of this contact was of a nature which was exceedingly forceful and quite violent. The contact caused a bloody mess, as each of the attackers, now having bashed in skulls, fell dead while dropping their weapons without causing harm to Robert or the amazing woman. Had she had her own mind, she would have realized that Robert had again displayed an unworldly strength. Ordinarily, Robert would never think extreme negative thoughts about people, but given that the trio had tried to kill him and an innocent, frightened woman, he found the manner of the dying that the poetic murderer and his two friends had endured to be comedic. This thought caused his mind to wonder if his mind had changed from cliché to ick words, and that in turn made him wonder if the day would ever come that he would have control of his own mind. He again found himself being hugged by a frightened woman who was either still or again shaking. Again he stepped out of her embrace. He looked down into her eyes. They still showed the lost look, but there was something about them that reached out to him and overpowered him. As he begged his mind not to think the term eye-catching, he spoke in an unbelievably calming and soothing manner. "So, can you tell me your name?" She was still only able to speak slowly, as if the words were physically heavy. "They were going to kill me." Robert knew that feeling all too well. He remained friendly, calm, and very patient. He had learned that it was extremely important to intentionally show a complete lack of panic when someone was struggling with the confusion. "Well, if you can't tell me your name, then I can call you something that describes you." Honestly, how does one describe a woman who's wearing torn clothing, and has skin that's grayish, leathery looking, and absolutely positively does not wish to be eaten by a horrendously injured lion. The thought was this: maybe if she considered herself, her brain would realize it could focus on something comprehensible. He didn't know if it would work. Then, the moment happened. Her eyes changed, or more correctly, her focus changed. Her eyes still owned him. No longer looking at nothing, they were now looking at him as she spoke. Her question was as honest and sincere as humanly possible. "You'd call me bad hair?" It worked. She was now on the way to sanity. The problem was the fact that her question was funny, and he almost couldn't prevent himself from laughing. So he changed to heroic mode, as he wondered if ick-word problems were better than cliché problems. I would never do that. I was thinking of something like, what does the hero insert here? Of course, the cool, calm, collected one had no problem with filling in the blank on the fly. 38. The woman looked at him with a look of wonder. Well, it was actually a look more like, it's possible you're nuts. But this was another victory. Her mind was controlling itself and her both now. Not that Robert is a master psychologist, but he had just successfully prevented a woman from falling into permanent insanity. But he did not think on that. Thinking of yourself as great is pathetic in his mind. Meaning, among other things, it had just become clear to him that ick words had in fact taken the place of cliché. Instead, he just explained what he meant. You are the 38th person I've met today. And that was true. She was the 38th person that he had met and prevented the death of on this particular day. And yes, he did keep count during his roundups. She did not know that. She just thought he was giving her a hard time. This meant her mind was working. Men, spoken with a very tiny amount of exasperation. I will not ever understand them or their humor. Robert, still not having any handbook, pointed out another truth since he did not know what else to say. I could call you person who conveniently brought a weapon with her. No longer under the control of the fear or severe confusion, though the fear had not completely vanished, the woman was able to speak. You can call me person who is more grateful than could ever be described and will do whatever it takes to thank her rescuer. But, if that's too long, you can call me 38. It had been a very long day for said rescuer, and sleep was very much the topmost topic on his mind. When he realized that, he was hopeful that sleep could rid his personal world of ick words. Well, Miss 38, may I have the pleasure of your company on the way to my camp, where there are neither hungry beasts nor flying bullets? I don't know. She actually sounded serious at the beginning of the statement. You're a messy man. She tried, but couldn't hold back her smile. Oh, most women would consider the promise of not being fed to a lion rather inviting. Oh, she thought. So you're an expert on women? Please, tell me more about this mysterious large man who steps out of the darkness and drastically alters a person's world. And that was the ick-word-filled discussion as a taller-than-average man and a taller-than-average woman walked across the southern plains of ANTERRA on a dark and stormy night.